segue into something, sort of a question, sort of a comment. I really appreciated following your process of trying to reclaim culture or find an expression for Latino culture, but going beyond the literal translation of aesthetics that you had seen and moving on into something less literal, I guess. And so it seems to me that mestizo regionalism isn't an aesthetic, it's more of a philosophy that guides your building. And I wonder if designing spaces and urban planning is more suited to introducing people to a less literal way of expressing their culture or their identity than maybe a mural. I was really interested in the fact that you said that the students hated the mural concept for the fine arts building. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that's because they thought of the mural as a purely aesthetic thing, that they wanted them to be more pictorial, whereas in a space they might not like the way the building looks, but when they walk through it they can feel that, yes, this is a space that I can use, that I like.
A lot of architecture. First of all, I can't separate urban planning and the spaces around my buildings from the kinds of spaces, the kind of space I want to build inside my buildings. I'm working on it's because it's all one thing, and it's the way that you feel when you're. I'm working on a building right now, just got a design through yesterday, and the way that you feel before you get into the building, and then the courtyard once you're through the building is just as important as the building itself. But you're right. I mean, the way people come together in spaces and is unifying, and the way you feel when you're in a well-planned space and in good architecture is universal. And it is my constant struggle to take a cultural activism. You're right. It is aesthetics, but it is also activism, to take it and marry it to what is really good architecture. I think that's where we are right now in our expression. I would like this to be a national idea, but in order for it to be a national idea, it has to be nationally significant architecture. And it has taken 10 plus years to get to the point where maybe it is starting to become that. So sometimes, and the other part of that is sometimes you can't tell, you have an idea and it comes from the people, but the way you funnel it back to them has to be politically correct. Like if I told the University of Texas Regents that I want to do a courtyard that really is an ice house, they would kill me. But if I tell them that I want a courtyard that fosters an interaction of people in a different way, they'll let me do it. And so I'm telling you some things that show you where the precedent is and where the ideas have come from, because I've only known how to find them in the daily lives of communities. There were no proper expressions of this anywhere. And one day, in fact, we're working on a book right now, one day after you are legitimized, and so I think maybe people will let me talk about it in a freer manner, but it is all of those things. It is activism, it is aesthetics, it is planning, and it is architecture, and the way that people relate to it is less about how I explain it than the way that they feel when they're in it. Yes, ma'am?
I think it's so important how you combine those, because if you think about our young people in some places in this country who have to spend so many of their years in buildings that don't really have any aesthetics that make them feel welcome and that they belong there. I mean, really, when you think about that, it's like torture. Really, some of our elementary all the way up through high school, and the sadness that you couldn't do exactly what you wanted to do because, there isn't the money to do what's really needed to do in a lot of those situations all over our country. It is very political, and I just love I admire how you're combining your activist roots and and putting that into what your daily work is. But it's, you know, you look at so many high schools and you wonder why. What were they thinking? And then how are these people feeling that are inside of them? I know my kids, I live in a really small town, and they had a really terrible high school that was probably designed in the 50s. And they did recreate that, and it was amazing, the change in the students. It was amazing how they cared for that place. It was obvious how they cared for it. There was less graffiti, there was less everything. And I just think it's so underestimated how young people have a sense for aesthetics, whether it's cultural or it's just an innate thing that we all have. But it would make an interesting documentary to bring a group of young people of all ages into different settings, and how do they really feel in those places that are so cold, and how can they possibly feel good about education?
There's a couple of points in there. The first thing I will say is there have now been enough schools that we've done that have had some of these ideas, and the main idea being that if young people can see themselves in the building, if it's aspirational, will it make a difference? And I have to say that having now circled back to some of these buildings, the respect level and the storytelling, because the kids that are there now were not the kids that were there when the schools were opened. And they tell stories, to hear them without knowing who I am, they tell stories about why the building looks the way that it is. It's I think it is having an impact. I think also that living today, like the color issue, you know, kids live in a computer world with bright colors, and they're bombarded all of the time, and they almost expect now to have vibrancy. The school board may not want me to do it. The president of the university might not want me to do it, but the students absolutely want me to do it. And so you are beginning to see that too. So a couple of things there. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of comments. First off, I couldn't have enjoyed your presentation more. I think you really are creating something out of whole cloth here. I can't put my finger on it. Particularly like the schoolwork you're doing, in that the movement in public schools now is that they're becoming fortresses, and some of the strength of the private institutions is that they remain community institutions. And to see that one where you had the courtyard, you used like you said, even some prefab buildings or prefab materials to keep the cost down, but then put a lot of energy towards the community that coming and going in the plaza. I think that was really amazing. And the other thing, I think, just from my opinion, the couple of buildings I thought that were the most powerful was that foundation building and then the Smithsonian building, where you seem to capture a continuum from really the pre-Columbian monumental American architecture with your volcanic stone and things like that, all the way through really a kind of some of that the power of the modernist architecture. And I just thought that foundation building was so powerful, and where you have that wall, that very monolithic slab, but it just seemed to be supported above the garden and everything like that. I mean, it seemed to hit a lot of buttons. I can't probably describe as eloquently as you could. But then I was looking at that civic building in San Antonio, and to me, it almost seemed apologetic. It was like, it looked like it belonged in Berlin, except that it had some lipstick on it. And I was like, it just seemed, it didn't seem to touch some of the power that you were able to put in some of those other buildings. And I'm wondering if you felt constrained, like, oh, it's a city center, it has to have Euro-style high-rise. I can't level it, I can't step it, I can't, because you just had those are glass towers dressed up, but, very much, like I said, the feeling was it was more Berlin than what I saw, where you really touched this continuum. I mean, there's so much power, I think, in those other buildings. Did you feel constrained?
Well, first of all, I just got back from Berlin. I went to the World Cup. this
know
week.
more about it than I do.
No. But and Berlin has. I know it's going to sound strange, but Berlin has a lot of affinity to San Antonio. It is a highly historic city. So you have historic buildings, right, and modern buildings right next to them, and that's an issue we always deal with in San Antonio. At the same time, San Antonio, this entire conversation is about whether you're going to be divided or whether you're going to be united, and so I think that's an important lesson. But the real answer is that I wanted to do modern architecture. I thought it was the appropriate expression because that place, Hemisphere, was about being modern. The second, and probably the most important answer for you is, yeah, of course you're constrained. I have to make the city happy. I have condos on top of the hotel. Getting stepped back means that the top of the building doesn't have the same presence on the river, which is where people are willing to pay $1,000 a foot to live. You know, I had to fight for color because, you know, or people in San Antonio, people in Miami would buy a condo in a red building, but will people in San Antonio buy a condo in a blue building? You know, they're not sure. I have a developer, an equity partner, and a hotel operator who has $15 million in the project. So, I mean, I'm so constrained that it's made my head spin for 2 years. And the other part of it is, they haven't built a high-rise building in San Antonio in 30 years. And that means I haven't. And so I don't really know quite what I'm doing yet either. And so I'll know better the next time. The next one maybe, I hope I get to do it. I hope they'll let me do another one. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, me? Okay. While you were doing your whole presentation, I was looking at these large, beautiful spaces, and I was wondering, how often do you use environmentally friendly materials and processes in your designs? Or techniques, I'm sorry.
There is a phenomenon in the Latino community called rascuachismo. Rascuachismo is an attitude of the poor. We've always had to reuse. We never had brand new. Okay? And so I didn't show you a project that is actually a project that is rascuachismo in itself, and that it is green architecture reusing an existing building structure with a village of 4 academic buildings underneath the structure. So we have been doing green building practices for a long time. I also like to think that green architecture is now a catchphrase for what we should be doing anyway. The way we site our buildings, the way we deal with climatic conditions. In South Texas, the cost of energy has, you know, all of those things we've been thinking about for a long time. Now, having said that, every single intern architect in our office has to be LEED accredited by the second year that they are with the firm. And we have just completed now. Green architecture is one thing, and then LEED certification is another, and the client has to be willing to pay for it. And so what we're finding a lot is that we can insert those kind of ideas into our public projects and hope that the building satisfies some of that standard. But I've only had one building, quite honestly, where the owner has been willing to pay, if you will, to get the building LEED certified. Now, it's the highest standard. We're seeking platinum certification. So the answer is, I've always had to do it because that's my culture. The second answer is, in order to create architecture, good architecture, I have to pay attention to it. And the third is, it has become a really rigorous part of our business practice and our philosophy.
You mentioned a whole series of members that you must gather with around the table to discuss particularly in public schools, for example. A number of the participants here have already mentioned that they are part of, their school is looking to revitalize itself or renew itself, build a new high school. What would you recommend to them that would equip them to arrive at that table and or talk to those who will be at that table? to carry their concerns and convey that through that particular process?
The first thing that I think is political. It's activism. I think that you have to say to your school board or to your community that they have to say, our buildings can be better. And in order for them to be better, there has to be something about them that is aspirational and that says something about our community. I don't know what that is. It's different from place to place. And some, like I said, in some places it's very aggressive, and in other places it's more inherent. It's a beautiful courtyard. The first thing is you have to say to the school boards are political. I live with lots of them. They change all the time in South Texas. You have to say, we want you to do better. Once you convince them, then they'll listen to you because they want to get reelected. Once you have organized yourself to demand, to express the idea that design is important to the learning process, then I think things like this are important, but quite honestly, the most important thing, I think, is to find a collaborator. In most cases, the architect who's going to design the building, who's sensitive to listening. Most architects, I now understand, I didn't know this 10 years ago, most architects go to an architectural school, and that architecture school has a specific orientation. The University of Texas at Austin has a very specific philosophy about what architecture in Texas is. And you come out of that school with, blinders on. I've had so many young, bright, smart, not just, but I'm going to use this example, Latino architects who would graduate from school never thinking that this was wrong to explore because it's less than or not proper or informal, whatever it is. And so I think finding an architect or a collaborator who is willing to work with you, to not let the design be about him or her, but to be about you, to express your story somehow in the building, I think is really important to the success of these schools. And it could be anything. It could be the idea that a school is the most technologically advanced school that there is. That's a cultural idea. That there's a connection, but they have to listen first. Yes, ma'am.